Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's video, we're going to take a look at Spongebob Squarepants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, and see how it compares to the original version of the game released back in 2003. For this analysis, we're going to be playing the new Rehydrated game on the PC running at a native 1440p resolution. And for the original game, I'll be running it on an emulator upscaled to 1440p at its original 4:3 aspect ratio to ensure we have the correct dimensions. Though bear in mind that thanks to various image enhancements offered by the emulator, the footage of this original game will sport much better aliasing and texture filtering than the actual source material. But for our purposes, this shouldn't make much of a difference, as we're really going to be looking more so at the reworked art style, character designs, lighting, and effects that have been used to bring this beloved classic to modern consoles. Alright, to kick this comparison off, let's start by taking a look at the quality of the characters, starting with everyone's favorite porous fry cook, SpongeBob. SpongeBob has a pretty iconic appearance, one that has changed very little over the course of the past 20 years. With those big bulgy eyes, that square body, those two buck teeth, and his stupid tie. But like the television show, the dimensions of his physical features have shifted ever so slightly, in order to give him a more childlike and cute appearance. His eyes, for example, are spaced further apart, and are much rounder than they used to be. His mouth is centered more, his dimples are reduced in size, and his spongy face as a whole is almost a perfect square, as opposed to the elongated rectangle that it initially appeared as. And sure enough, it appears that Purple Lamp Studios have opted to use his more modern design for their character model, rather than just remaking the classic design that was featured in the 2003 game. Along with this subtle design tweak are several visual enhancements made possible by the more advanced graphics engine being used. This new model, despite its seemingly basic design, is made up of several more polygons to help round out the finer details like his shoes and legs. Additionally, several higher res textures have also been applied, turning his one-color toned pants into something with actual depth. It's strange seeing such a three-dimensional version of a character that's so commonly attributed to two dimensions, but it works surprisingly well, and the increased color variety really helps to make this and every other character pop on the screen. Patrick in particular looks fantastic in the remake, with a more rounded and colorful character model. Additionally, the dark lines on his forehead previously used to highlight the bend in his forehead have been removed. A similar change can be found with Squidward, where the wrinkles on his forehead look like they were drawn on, but now appear like they're actually part of his character model. Squidward's coloration has also been altered, just like SpongeBob, to appear more like his current appearance in the television show. And on top of the enhanced visual quality, each character model has also been given additional animations, allowing them to react more appropriately based on the dialogue being delivered, along with some great new idle animations that fans will pick up on immediately. Each redesigned character looks great in relation to this 3D version of Bikini Bottom, and while I still appreciate the original character designs more for capturing the original art style of the early seasons, there's no denying the higher quality and complexity of these new models. Next, let's look at how the environments have been changed. This isn't just a bunch of new textures and enhanced lighting, every single model was lovingly recreated for this remake. Objects like SpongeBob's foghorn alarm clock now sport a noticeably higher poly count, rounding out the edges perfectly to match its appearance in the show. This is the case with pretty much everything I looked at, from door frames to porthole windows, and the rounded inflatable cushions on SpongeBob's couch. What's even more interesting is that the developers even made sure to preserve all the really small details from before. This corner inside SpongeBob's closet, for example, has an identical layout, only it looks much better now. In other places, some entirely new details have been added, like the additional canned food on top of his refrigerator, or these new broken robot pieces sitting in the craters outside. One change that I'm a little torn on though are the framed pictures throughout each character's home. It's definitely funny seeing some of the more ridiculous SpongeBob memes being hung on the wall, like a portrait of handsome Squidward hanging inside of Squidward's house. But in some cases, these alterations just feel out of place. This image of SpongeBob and Squidward, for example, originally had a Friends label along the border, which is exactly the kind of ridiculous picture SpongeBob would put in his living room. But now it looks like the developers just took a high-res screenshot from an episode where they're both in a similar position and then dropped it into the frame. And while it's a funny nod to fans of the television show, it does seem like a bit much. But these are just the less involved hub areas. The actual level environments are even more impressive. Jellyfish Fields, the first real level in the game, looks remarkable now, with hugely extended draw distances paired with lush fields of dynamic grass sprites similar to the recent Spyro the Dragon remakes. These reworked locations are beautifully detailed, and stand out even more thanks to the brighter color tone and improved lighting effects. I especially love the redesign of the environmental skyboxes, that not only help to sell the illusion that you're underwater more, but also show distant level areas, like the Dutchman's Graveyard way off in the distance. The only real issue I ran into with these outdoor environments involved the level boundaries. In SpongeBob's neighborhood, the red line that clearly identified the edge of the play zone has been replaced with a short ledge drop-off, that, for new players, is pretty unclear. It's weird that they opted to change this border in this way, as the Bikini Bottom city level still sports the same old red dotted line as before. What's even more strange is that while looking at this red border, I managed to accidentally bypass the level's borders entirely, and was able to freely walk around out of bounds, exploring things that were clearly not intended to be seen up close. The fact that I was even able to find this so easily suggests that there's likely a number of major gaps in the game's boundaries, and this should definitely be addressed with the patch as soon as possible. But it's at least interesting to see how the developers piece together distant landmarks to make the environments feel more believable. I also found a few interesting new additions to some levels, like this curious new small dirt mound in one of the Jellyfish Fields areas, that can be used to skip over to a central island that was previously only accessible via a bridge by Mrs. Puff. It's not game-breaking or anything, but I'm curious if this was done for the sake of shaving down traversal time or something. Next, let's talk about the lighting. As you've probably already noticed, the lighting has been altered a significant amount. Everything about Rehydrated is much more bright and vibrant, matching the more colorful tone of the more recent TV episodes. SpongeBob is almost blindingly yellow now, and the game's contrast seems to be completely blown out, hiding some of the great new details that the developers managed to squeeze in. Also, a lot of the objects, like the game's many tiki heads, have been redesigned with a more colorful pattern, adding to the vibrancy of the experience. On top of this, Rehydrated also incorporates some new baked light rays in a few of its interior scenes, along with enhanced bloom effects for shiny surfaces to help give them a more reflective appearance. This really helps give Rehydrated a flashy, clean look, and while it's certainly eye-catching, I'd argue that it at times can be a bit excessive, and the overly bright new direction steers further away from the classic aesthetic that the original game was aiming for. What's more, the cool water reflection effect that was applied to structures like SpongeBob's house are no longer visible in the remake. To make up for this though, Rehydrated does feature some nice specular lighting effects for some of its textured surfaces, making things like Squidward's tiki house and Patrick's rock feel more integrated into the game's atmosphere. The shadows are also pretty disappointing. For a game from 2020, I expected more advanced shadows all around, from characters to the environment. But unfortunately, the development team opted for incredibly simplistic disc shadows for all NPC characters. This is especially odd considering even the original 2003 game had real-time character shadows, however simplistic they may have been. The player's shadow is at least still rendered in real time, though up close it appears incredibly pixelated, with no way to improve its quality thanks to the limited graphics options menu. On the plus side, the environmental shadows are a little bit more impressive. Most of the larger structures cast decent soft shadows that look much better than the static baked shadows used before. Though I do wish more of the environmental props, like some of the smaller trees and the many tiki heads, would also cast shadows, as it's difficult at times to see where they stand in relation to the rest of the environment. Next, we have effects. Despite being under the sea, Spongebob Squarepants has plenty of interesting effects to observe, including water simulation, or rather goo simulation, fire, explosives, and plenty of particles. The goo, which serves as the universe's water, has more of a cartoony style than it did before. The edges now have bright white lines to indicate ripples, and new parallax effects have been incorporated to give the water surface a more believable depth. It's not amazing, and there's no form of player interaction other than freezing it with a power-up, but it gets the job done at least, and fits in nicely with the game's art style. It's also much better than what the original game featured, which were essentially low-res repeating textures moving unnaturally upstream. The fire effects, like the ones found in this underground cavern, are also much more impressive now, with additional ember particles and bright lighting bloom used to enhance the effect further. I even found some areas like Squidward's fireplace rendering some nice new flame effects, that in the original game never appeared at all, despite still featuring a fire sound effect. But of course, one of the most common effects throughout the game involved bubbles. Lots and lots of bubbles. These bubble effects trigger whenever SpongeBob or his friends initiate any sort of attack, and can also be seen emitting from random points in the environment. With the remake, the number of bubbles on screen has been increased substantially to give the game a much more consistent underwater vibe. Along with these bubbles are other soft water particle effects scattered throughout each environment that further add to the illusion and are a nice subtle touch. Finally, let's wrap up with a brief sound comparison. Which game do you think has the superior audio design?
Again! I will crush them!
Squidward, I don't know what to do. How can I fix everything?
Why don't you move to another town? That should help out more than enough. Move to another town. I crack me up.
Squidward, I don't know what to do. How can I fix everything?
Why don't you move to another town? That should help out more than enough. Move to another town. I crack me up.
And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, SpongeBob Rehydrated is a noticeable visual improvement over the original 2003 classic. Character models have all been completely recreated, resembling their current cartoon designs more closely. The environments have similarly been overhauled, with higher polycount objects and new high-res textures, and several new details have been added in to improve the atmosphere even more. And while most of the changes look great and give the game a nice clean appearance, they do also detract a little bit from the original game's art style. The lighting feels overblown with almost too much color, and the new photographs hanging on the wall, while funny, don't really fit the game world appropriately. I'm also disappointed that they still couldn't manage to get the real voice actor for Mr. Krabs to redo the lines, leaving us with an out-of-place stand-in instead. And then there's the technical issues, like the level boundaries not functioning properly, Steam VR needlessly launching whenever I boot up the game, and the needless arena-style multiplayer mode that really doesn't add that much to the quality of the game. Still, despite those issues, many of which can be easily rectified with a later game update, SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated is a beautiful reimagining of a cult classic, and totally worth checking out if you're currently, or ever have been, a fan of this iconic Nickelodeon mascot. And if you are planning on picking it up to play on your PC, be sure to follow the link in the description to get 10% off your purchase at Green Man Gaming. But what do you guys think? Are you happy with the changes made in Rehydrated? Or do you still prefer the original game? Let me know in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.